We can get the meeting underway. I'll turn it over to Acting CMC Chair, Councilmember Chai Lee.
Everyone, good afternoon. It is 1:06 p.m. I'd like to call this Corridor Management Committee meeting to order. First of all, I might be a new face to some of you here. Before today, most of the Purple Line, I was the alternate to Council Member Sue Vento, and now with the new political districts, most of the Purple Line is in my district, which is District 13. Chair Zelle is not able to be here this afternoon as of yet, so he asked me to chair in his stead until he can join us. If I don't see him when he comes in, if staff notices it, please just let me know and then he can jump in. For today, before we begin, we have a couple of housekeeping reminders for virtual meetings. Please turn on your cameras when speaking. Please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Please indicate whether you would like to speak by raising your hand. The meeting is being recorded by the Met Council and will be available for viewing shortly after the meeting. Meetings, agendas, summaries, and presentations materials are posted on the project website at metrotransit.org/purple line project committees. Let's see. I think that's it. For today's topics, we have two substantive topics on today's agenda. The first is Committee and Business Advisory Committee report, and then the BRT route modification study phase 2 update. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge Darren Tobel, who is new to the Corridor Management Committee. He is serving as the alternate for Commissioner Reinhardt, who is unable to be with us here today. I'd also like to acknowledge that this will be Mike Barnes' last Purple Line CMC meeting. After a long and distinguished career, Mike will be retiring from MnDOT in early October. Mike, we thank you for your service to the region and to the state. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have our Community and Business Advisory Committee report. As co-chair Ianni Houmas to provide us with an update on Monday's CBAC meeting. Welcome, Ianni.
Liz, do we have Ianni on, or has he not been able to make the meeting so far?
I have not seen him pop on. He was supposed to be here, but I can fill in, and if he hops on later, we can ask for anything else that I might have missed. But we did convene our CBAC meeting yesterday, wanted to give them an update and really get some feedback from them on our proposed station locations. And so we had pretty good turnout from folks. Fortunately, throughout all of our engagement events that we've been up to these past few months, CBAC have been pretty well involved. So that's been really great to see. And so we'll get into some engagement, what we've been hearing from the broader community later, but I'll just note that some of the station locations that we'll be discussing, the CBAC has been showed to be in favor, which this has also been a pretty favorable location from the broader community of having a station location kind of around the corner of White Bear Avenue in Maryland. As well as the CBAC, Larpenteur has been kind of in the top 3. It was in the top 2 for CBAC, and Clarence Street as well from the CBAC, and those were kind of the St. Paul stations. And then Maplewood, Larpenteur again kind of rose to the top for both, knowing that it's right on the Maplewood St. Paul line. A lot of folks interested in the Maplewood Mall Transit Center, and then kind of that 11th and Jarvis Avenue area near that High B as well. Again, similar comments that we've heard from the public when we had conversation with CBAC about importance in selecting station locations or other areas. So wanting access to high density housing, affordable housing, jobs, being close to the highest number of people, walkability, rollability, accessibility to the stations, thinking about safety and access for folks with disabilities and seniors as well. So those are really some of the conversations that we had. Generally, overall, and with feedback, we haven't received a lot of feedback outside of this area that we're proposing station locations. We still have received a lot of support for the Purple Line to serve Century College. And an important location that has risen to the top is serving the Iowa high rise. And so we'll continue, as we'll talk about throughout this meeting and as we move forward, how we can adjust our station locations and pedestrian access and connectivity to make sure that, again, we are serving the senior community and of large affordable housing complexes as best that we can. I think that is all that I have from the CBAC.
Thank you, Liz. Before we go further, are there any questions or discussions from members today about what Liz just said? I don't see any hands raised. Thanks, Liz. We'll go next to the route modification study phase 2 update. I'll ask project manager Craig Lamothe to provide us all with a status update on phase 2 of the route modification study. Welcome, Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, committee members. You're going to hear from several members of the project team today. I will cover just a few slides just to remind this committee where we're at in the process. But before I get to that, we've been spending a lot of the summer understanding the corridor we've now been asked to take a look at for possibilities of Purple Line. And so part of that is really looking to see who is out there, who would be served by this investment. This slide really represents at a glance the demographics of Maryland and White Bear Avenue corridor. These are all metrics that indicate a strong likelihood of good transit use on this corridor. Everything from the quantity of population and households to the age demographics, access to automobiles, income, number of jobs in this corridor. This corridor is different than the Bruce Vento Trail corridor. That's a mile to the west, but we'll spend more time comparing the two corridors to one another come next spring after we've focused our time and attention on looking at how do we accommodate a dedicated transit project on Maryland and White Bear Avenues. And you'll start to hear a little bit about station locations with the meeting today. As indicated on this slide, we are sitting here in September. We are 3, 4, 5 months into a year-plus process. We anticipate that we won't have a decision on Purple Line in terms of which quarter Purple Line wants to move forward in until this time next year. So we have a lot of work to do, a lot of information that we'll be sharing with this committee and others over the course of the next year. And it starts really today with seeking your concurrence on an action related to stations that you're going to hear most of today's presentation focused on. And then we'll be back before this committee again next month to preview, not for action, but to preview what we're referring to as the most promising design, roadway, and transit design options for Maryland and White Bear Avenues. That's coming out of the Tier 1 screening process that we've been working with project partners on. And then we'll spend most of the remainder of the fall and winter evaluating those most promising concepts. And then we'll come back before this body in March with a recommended preferred layout for Maryland and White Bear Avenues. And we'll get a little bit more about your meeting schedule toward the end of this meeting, but that's what we're focusing on. That's where we sit today. You'll hear about outreach that we've done on stations. You already heard a little bit about that with the CBAC report from Liz, but we plan on going out to the public and talking about these most promising concepts over the course of the next several months. And we'll bring all that feedback back to this group in that March timeframe, both the technical aspects of the work as well as what we're hearing from the public. Before we get into stations, though, I wanted to make this group aware of more of a process. situation that we are working through right now with the Federal Transit Administration. So when this project was transitioned from Ramsey County's leadership over to council leadership in the fall of 2021, one of the very first actions we took was to enter the project into the federal program, the Capital Investment Grant Program that it's known as, that typically funds many of these transitway projects we have here in this region, including many of the ones that are now operational. And we entered into what is known as the project development phase in December of 21. That is by federal statute, anticipated to be a 2-year phase. So we are scheduled for completing that phase on December 8th of this year. With the changes that have occurred with this project since December of 21, we are not going to be able to complete the requirements of the project development phase that are expected by the Federal Transit Administration. So those will not be met by December 8th. And there's not many, but they're important milestones for projects like this. And the 4 things that need to be completed to be considered complete with the project development phase is you need to have a locally preferred alternative adopted into the Regional Transportation Plan, which is a federal document. That we do have an LPA, but the LPA we have for this project currently is the project we started with, which runs from downtown St. Paul to downtown White Bear Lake. And we know that is the project that is likely not to advance forward. So we will need to amend the policy plan to amend in the revised LPA, which we don't know at this time and won't know likely until this time next year. We are also supposed to complete 30% design, what is known as preliminary engineering. When we started this phase, the project to downtown White Bear Lake was environmentally cleared, so it had gone through the environmental review process and was at about 25% level of design back in December of 21. And if we are to move on forward with a different corridor, such as Maryland and White Bear Avenue, we'll need to advance it to 30% design to be considered complete on project development phase. We also need, as I mentioned earlier, to complete an environmental review process. So if we are on a different corridor, if that's what the ultimate decision is made, we will have to redo the environmental review process that was completed in 2020 and 2021. We'll have to revisit at least north of Maryland Avenue, and that would take about 12 months to complete that work. And then lastly, we have to submit a large package of information to the Federal Transit Administration so that they can evaluate and rate the project. We would have been originally planned to do that last August with the project that we had entered into the program with. We did not make that submittal. We will not make that submittal until we know what corridor Purple Line wants to be in. So all 4 of the key requirements of the PD phase will not be complete by December 8th of this year. So we have been in discussions with the Federal Transit Administration since early summer, talking to them about needing an extension of the project development phase. And so we've been talking to them about the unforeseen circumstances, which is a reason to get an extension from the federal government. And then to talk about the schedule we believe we'll need to follow to complete those 4 key requirements. And so we are right now positioning ourselves to make a formal request to the Federal Transit Administration late this month so that they have adequate time to process our request before the current project development phase would expire on December 8th. We are seeking a 22-month time extension so that we can complete the environmental process. Often with these projects, no matter where you are in the process, the environmental process is a very detailed from a technical standpoint and has a significant public component to it as well. So oftentimes the environmental process is what drives a lot of the work early on these projects. And that is the case here as well. We believe in September of 2025, we could complete all of the necessary work and be able to successfully meet the requirements of the project development phase. So I just wanted to make the group aware of that. Last slide that I have for you today is just to let you know that at the end of the presentation today, at the end of the meeting, we will be seeking this committee's action giving concurrence to the station locations that you're going to hear a lot about today. So why do we need to have your support now? And it is not necessarily to lock in the stations in terms of the number of stations and the exact locations of the stations. Those will come in March with the preferred concept. But what we are going to be seeking from you is support to move forward with the stations that we'd like to take into the technical evaluation. Because if we don't have station locations, we can't do ridership forecasting, as an example. We also are getting close to, as I mentioned earlier, getting down to the most promising design options for laying out White Bear Avenue and Maryland Avenue in terms of a roadway configuration with dedicated transit. So understanding whether an intersection wants to have a station at it or not will drive how we lay that intersection out with turn lanes and station platforms. So we need to understand where the station locations generally want to be. And then beyond that, as we get into the fall and even into the spring, we're going to get into BRT platform siting. What you'll see today is not quadrants of intersections where we're proposing stations to be, but rather more generalized areas. We also need to understand in between the different concepts how the BRT service will work along with the local bus operations. And as I mentioned earlier, ridership forecasting is key because that, along with the cost estimating, will allow us to make that submittal to FTA to get a project rating. And we also need to understand where the stations might want to be so we can start looking at things like station area planning, understand how walk access, how somebody with a mobility device would access those station areas, and bicycle accessibility as well. So that's why we are going to be seeking an action from you later in this meeting. With that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn this back to you and be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Craig, for the status update on phase 2 of the route modification study. Are there any questions from committee members? Craig, I have one quick question. Is there precedent for us asking an extension from the FTA? Is it easy or hard, if we have done this before, asking for an extension of this length of time?
Mr. Chair, that's a great question. So there is precedent for extensions of project development phase from FTA. They have granted that over the years to other projects. We have not necessarily asked for any of our projects we've done to date or are in process, have asked for a PD phase extension specifically. On Gold Line most recently, a couple of years ago, they were able to complete their project development phase. I think it took them down to the last day of that 2-year period. They got the environmental decision, but then they weren't yet ready to advance into the engineering phase, which is the subsequent phase. In that case, FTA granted Gold Line 2 6-month engineering deferments, which are similar to PD phase extensions, but a little different and issued for different reasons. But the process does allow for this. FTA specifically asked for telling your story about unforeseen circumstances, because oftentimes these projects, as they move along, will encounter unforeseen circumstances, particularly early on in the process. So projects around the country have received it. We have not had yet one of our regional projects receive a PD phase extension, primarily because we've never asked for one.
All right, thanks. Are there any other questions from other committee members? All right, thanks, Greg. Seeing none, we'll move on to community outreach engagement on potential station locations. Next, I'll ask Community Outreach and Engagement Lead Liz Jones to review recent outreach and engagement efforts and feedback received, in particular regarding potential station locations. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, committee members and everybody. Again, Liz Jones, I'm the outreach lead on Purple Line and I'm on Gold Line as well. Just want to give a little bit of an update of what we've been hearing the past couple months. I know when we chatted in June at our June meeting, we talked a lot about what kind of initial engagement and feedback we've been hearing throughout May and June, really letting folks know that we were looking at this corridor and some really high level information about the project and spreading awareness. Over the last couple months here, we have been out getting some a little bit more specific feedback on station locations, but still pretty high level, kind of based on these general station location areas that we're looking at. So I'll give an update on that. Next slide, please. And so this image and this image in different formats is what we have been focusing on for our station location feedback. Like I mentioned, you'll notice the kind of green, we've been calling them beans. They're a little bit wider radius for study area, and that's again what is being asked of the CMC for concurrence today on what areas we should be studying for station locations. These are largely based off of the current Route 54 stops. And then kind of the reasonable spacing for the half-mile walk access throughout most of the corridor. So that's kind of the general spacing between these stations. So these locations are what we have been asking the public about throughout July and August. Next slide, please. So again, like we mentioned before, in May and June and in kind of the later part of spring and earlier part of summer, we're really just been getting out there, spreading information, connecting with folks throughout this new corridor, because although it is, only about a mile from the Bruce Federal Trail, a lot of businesses and a lot of new folks in this area who are not necessarily familiar with the project. So between that and then our effort to hone in on these potential station locations, and this is kind of a conservative number, but 800 to 900 people, and that's really through all of our meetings and community and business group presentations. We've done pop-ups in community spaces, done a lot of canvassing. The team has been doing a really great job canvassing all the businesses, and I know we talked a little bit about that last time, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail coming up here, but really trying to connect as much as we can throughout the approximately 200 businesses kind of in the specific Maryland and White Bear Avenue corridor, and meeting folks in person at bus stops, on transit routes, meeting people where they're at. And of course, we have our digital communications, newsletters, social media website, have had some surveys, an interactive map, and including translated materials and outreach as well. So it's been a really busy spring and summer reaching folks, but it's been really great to be out there and talking to folks about the project and about this potential route that we're looking at. Next slide, please. This breaks down some of our canvassing event, kind of pop-up community event, and then open house locations. So just wanted to point out that we do emphasize hosting event locations on high BIPOC communities. So you can see kind of that legend there breaks down all of our canvassing, tabling, popping up at community spaces or attending community events, and then a couple community meetings. And this does not include virtual events, but we have had a number of virtual community meetings or virtual neighborhood or business organization meetings. And then we did have a virtual open house as well, but these are just specifically in person to show that we did, try to kind of get the whole White Bear Avenue and Maryland corridor, but really wanted to focus our efforts on some of the BIPOC communities. Next slide, please. These are the questions that we asked folks to really hone in on these specific station locations. So wanting to know, kind of spreading the education that these are generally Route 54 and looking at what does that mean with adjustments to the Route 54, which we are still, don't know for sure. But folks generally thought that was a good starting point, but really wanting to know out of all of these potential locations, what would be priorities, knowing that we may not be able to deliver every single one of these locations. Wanting to know what is important to folks when selecting station locations. Also, what is a priority? Would it be kind of a faster travel time? So that would be fewer stations or more stations and a shorter walk distance, which would be slower travel time, but more stations. And then if there were any other areas kind of outside of what we're outlining here that should be considered. So next slide, please. So some of the feedback on these questions that we've had, and I touched on a lot of this in giving the CBAC update at the beginning of this meeting, but we've heard pretty consistent feedback from folks. But I would say White Bear Avenue and Maryland Station, kind of on that corridor, has risen to the top kind of from all of our engagements that we've had on folks really wanting a station there. Maplewood Transit Center, and then again, Larpenteur, and there's been a few more for Clarence and 11th and Jarvis areas as well, but really White Bear Avenue, Maplewood Mall Transit Center, and Larpenteur have been kind of the top 3 station location preferences. Folks listed for important factors in selecting station locations. Again, proximity to people, so where folks live, where folks work, services, shopping centers, accessible stations that are accessible for pedestrians and bicyclists, connectivity to other community amenities, so bike lanes, other bus lines, trails, etc. Making sure that we are serving folks who utilize transit and rely on transit is very important in selecting station locations as well, is what we've heard. And overall, I will add that there's been a lot of nuance and conversation on this question of more or less stations, faster or slower service. Generally, folks want faster service, so that would be fewer stations. But there is a lot of nuance. We've dialed into some of these questions on how far would you be willing to walk, roll, or use a mobility device to get between stations or to travel to a station? And knowing that we're in Minnesota, it can vary based on weather, of course, is a big one. And of course, there's variance based on abilities, but overall, folks have been more inclined to travel a little bit farther to have that faster service. Generally, in terms of other areas, like I mentioned earlier, we've still been probably the most feedback we've been getting is interest in connecting beyond this corridor to Century College. So we've still been hearing that a lot. And then wanting to really dial in and serve the Iowa high rise, which is a little bit south of Larpenteur, a little bit more closely. So that's something that the team is going to look at as well. Next slide, please. These are very similar to what we heard kind of when we were doing our initial feedback on the corridor, but we've continued to hear some of these themes and ideas that have come from folks in our engagements. So really safety and security has been a really big topic and concern from folks. So we have fortunately been able to share a lot of information about Metro Transit Safety and Security Action Plan, and some of what has been implemented and what is coming up, and sharing some of the amenities of BRT with the additional cameras and security features. So that's been really helpful. Again, knowing that weather in Minnesota is all over the place, so wanting kind of that shelter from weather and heating facilities. A lot of questions still, and we don't necessarily have this information, but people, of course, want more information, which we'll continue to have kind of throughout this initiative on what are potential property impacts, what will the roadway design look like, what might be vegetation impacts, things like that. So it's been good to connect with folks kind of in these early stages to let them know that these are some of the questions that will be answered, that we'll work with the community on as we continue to advance this initiative. But again, been able to answer a lot of questions on the amenities of BRT, and some of the impacts, lots of questions on, if we remove the lanes on White Bear Avenue, what will that do to traffic? And again, those are types of information that we will have as we continue to move forward on more of those specifics, but a lot of good conversations that we've been having with folks. And definitely still have heard a mix of preferences between White Bear Avenue and Bruce Vento Trail, but definitely overwhelmingly a lot of support for this alignment on Maryland and White Bear Avenue. I'll also just note that we are compiling a report. So we have gotten a lot of feedback, and like I noted before, we've talked to a lot of people and have had a lot of opportunities for engagement. We are compiling a report for that, so that'll be available to the CMC. And we are still continuing to be out in the community. We're continuing with our pop-ups. We aren't going to have kind of specific project open houses until we do have these layouts to share kind of early next year. But continuing to do pop-ups. Tonight we'll be in Maplewood at the Touch a Truck event. That is in the community center parking lot. And then this weekend we have 2 events. So both will be at the Cluas Fiesta Latina event, which is always really great, and the Wiper Avenue Parade as well. We are also in the planning stages, and you'll hear more about this at the next CMC meeting next month. But we are planning walking and rolling tours to get out on the corridor physically along Maryland and Wiper Avenue with folks from community to do walking and rolling tours for different segments of the corridor. So we are planning for those in October. So next time we chat, we'll have more information on those as well. And I think that is all that I have.
Yeah, thank you, Liz, for providing us with a review of the outreach and engagement efforts, and what you're hearing from the public about the potential station locations. I want to pause and offer space for folks who have questions or comments for Liz. All right, seeing none.
Oh, sorry, Chair.
Go ahead, Commissioner John.
Yeah, sorry, I just could not press the raising my hand quick enough. Liz, thank you so much for all the work that's gone into the feedback, or like trying to solicit feedback. I think this is really positive, and it's really it's really exciting, and also something that's consistent with what I'm hearing too, just around concerns, excitement, and also about the alignment. I also have to ask is if you've started collecting demographics of survey participants, and also to see if that's something that you're seeing that it matches, reflects the demographics of the community right now too.
Thank you, Commissioner Zhang. So Chair and committee members, we haven't done a really large formal survey for this effort. It's been more of kind of questionnaires, conversational, sharing a lot of high-level information. As we progress into kind of our next phase, and we'll have more kind of specific survey questions that we'll distribute broadly on the actual roadway layouts, that's when we would have a survey. And we do offer, or we do include optional demographic information for that effort. So at this point, I know early in the presentation, Craig shared some demographics of this corridor, which is a little bit different than the Bruce Vento Trail corridor, and then just wanted to show kind of that high-level map of where we've hosted some of these locations in BIPOC community areas. But definitely, once we do have more of those specific survey questions to ask, we do include demographic information if folks want to share that with us.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Liz. Are there any other questions before we move on? All right, seeing none.
I did have one, if possible.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is Luke Schlegel from Matamidi. So I think my only question and comment, again, I'm in no position to make comments about the location on White Bear Avenue. I would be interested and maybe this is part of the plan, as we move towards developing the end point, understanding where the demand was for Century College traffic. That was mentioned a couple times over the past few slides, that came up over and over, and I didn't know if that was surrounding specific stations or if it was just generally across the whole thing. So just making sure at some point before the endpoints are picked, we understand how that Century College demand was met based on the station locations along White Bear Avenue.
Thank you, Councilmember Schlegel and Chair and Commissioners. I'll just note that what I've mentioned in the past, in the previous slides, is more so just kind of feedback that folks have an interest in going to Century College. There's been a lot of feedback from schools, knowing that folks kind of go to Century College for a lot of service learning and career training. So it's more of just been interest in that. But as we do progress this effort, advance in this effort, and kind of do the comparison and ridership and data on both alignments, and then again, look at what a potential to connect beyond Maplewood looks like, that information will definitely be shared out. And I don't know if Craig or Stephen, you wanted to share anything else on that.
No, I think other than to say that, and I didn't touch on it enough, and I can touch on it again at the end. So after we get to a preferred concept on White Bear, Maryland Avenue, we would be exploring potentially going further to the north and beyond Maplewood Mall Transit Center. And I'll echo what Liz said, is we've heard an interest in getting a connection from the east side of St. Paul, particularly to Century, and for something better. The good news is that the Route 219 was brought back to its pre-pandemic service levels back about 4 weeks ago to serve the college as start of the fall semester. But we know from the conversations we had with Century last year that 219 service at 30-minute frequency was just meeting, if you want to call it that, their needs. They were looking for something more frequent with less stops between the transit center and the college campus. So those are things that will be ongoing conversations internal at Metro Transit. And I think as we get closer to spring, as we formally look at potential destinations further to the north, then we would be looking at that a little more deeply.
And Luke, I want to add, I've heard from previous commissioners, Ramsey County commissioners, anecdotally about the struggles of some of the students who go to Century. There's not a lot of frequent transit there, so unfortunately, there have been anecdotal stories that some students actually have to plan their leaving classes early or skipping the first or second half of class to get on public transit because of the infrequency of our transit in that area.
Right. Yeah. And again, great. That's, one of the main reasons why I'm here. And thank you for all that information. Again, I want to make sure if there's and maybe it's not, maybe I'm overthinking this a little bit, but if there are pockets of areas along the corridor on White Bear that over-index towards Century College users, that gets into consideration. And that's what I would be most interested in understanding. And just where my comment came from. So I think we're on top of that, and just wanted to reference as far as my interest in where those locations are, rather than feeling like I have a perspective on where those stations should be located. So thank you very much for that explanation.
Sure. Thanks, Luke. Anyone else have any final questions for Liz before we move on? All right, seeing none, we will go next to staff recommendation, station locations. I will ask engineering and design manager Sara Pflaum. I'm sorry, I probably butchered your name. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Sara. So I'll ask Sara to walk us through station locations proposed along Maryland, White Bear, and Beam Avenues. Welcome, Sara.
And I just want to note for Councilmember Lee, Chair Zelle has just joined us in the last minutes. Just want to make you aware of that.
All right, you can take over, Charlie.
Well, I'm just listening, and thank you, Councilmember Lee, for chairing the meeting. I'm sorry, everyone, that I'm a little late, but I'm, as you are, interested in these presentations. So thanks, Sara.
Thank you, Chair. And you can go to the next slide, Greg. So I'm going to walk us through kind of a deeper dive into the station locations, but I also wanted to show you first, we've had our team looking at the walkability, kind of the walk shed of these potential station locations. And what you see in the red shading is the ability to walk, have like about a 10-minute walk to each station location. And this is just important to show the coverage of these stations and just how big of an area that that we can actually serve with these station locations. And then, you know, the shape of the walk shed is a little bit, it's not smooth, but that it goes along with the street network. So that's why there are kind of gaps and chunks, especially like around Highway 36 and stuff. So starting where we deviate from the Bruce Vento Trail alignment right at Maryland and Johnson Parkway, that very first station, that location that we would get to would be the Clarence Street station, and it would be shared down Maryland Avenue as well. And this station today with the Route 54 and some of the other local routes is one of the busiest stations in the East Metro. It kind of covers 2 St. Paul neighborhood nodes. There's a lot of retail there with the Cub Foods and some other more, and McDonald's and Dairy Queen and things like that. But it's definitely a walkable neighborhood, and there's also multifamily housing nearby. So those are all the things that make this a good station location. The next station, also shared with H-Line, would be the Hazelwood Street station. That also has a significant amount of multifamily public housing nearby, and a little bit of retail, but it's mostly the housing that the station would serve that make it a good location. And this would be the last station that Purple Line would share with the H-Line. The Purple Line will be turning north. The H-Line will be turning south on White Bear Ave. And that is why that circle, the oval for the station location, is so large and kind of goes back on Maryland a little bit, because sharing a station when H-Line turns south and Purple Line turns north means that we probably have to move back from the intersection a little bit to be able to serve both our needs. But this was one of the top locations from the public feedback, and it is the center of a big St. Paul neighborhood node. There's a lot of housing around, a little bit of multifamily, a lot of single family, and some retail right at that intersection. The first station on White Bear Ave would be at Arlington, and this was desired by our partners in St. Paul as it could be a good new St. Paul neighborhood node. There's a library right next to this intersection. There's some retail, and then a lot of single family housing. The Larpenteur Avenue station was identified both in St. Paul and Maplewood as an important station location. This is the border between St. Paul and Maplewood. And this area, there are several parcels that have been identified for redevelopment in both cities' comp plans. On the Maplewood north side of the graphic, that whole area in kind of a yellow has been identified by Maplewood as, you know, potential mixed use, future development. And then you can see the Iowa Street high rise, Iowa Avenue high rise, between Iowa and Idaho is here. It's very large. Public housing, high rise for St. Paul. There is also a potential development with St. Paul Housing Authority, just kitty corner across the street from that. So this is one of those locations where that Bean station area kind of may shift slightly south, or we may try to be as far south as we can, just so that we make sure that we serve some of those important locations, especially because we've heard that there are a lot of seniors and disabled folks in that high rise. So the next station that we come to is the Frost Avenue station. Ramsey County owns quite a bit of property around that station, and that has been identified as an important area for future development. There's a future substance abuse treatment center that is planned there. And then Frost Avenue could be an important connection to some developments that are happening around the Bruce Pinto Trail. So, and then there's a lot of single family housing around there. The County Road B station is very close to the Maplewood City campus and their community center, YMCA complex. There is a lot of retail in that vicinity. There's one very large parcel nearby that has been identified for mixed-use redevelopment. And then there is some existing multifamily housing that would be served by this station. 11th and Jarvis is the next station. That has a lot of big retail uses right adjacent to that potential station location. There's a Hy-Vee, there's a Home Depot, there's quite a bit of multi-family housing right there. There is a parcel nearby that has been explored for redevelopment, so there's some potential there too. But that has a lot of opportunities nearby. And then County Road C has also been identified for redevelopment in Maplewood's comp plan, kind of those areas that are shaded in yellow. And they also had 72 units of senior housing recently approved. Harmony Learning Center is there. And so those are some of the important land uses right now that deserve consideration to be served by a station. Then this would be the last station on White Bear Ave. It's right at the intersection of Beam and White Bear Avenue. This is an important station to serve Maplewood's North End District. And it could also be a good connection for residents that are northwest of the intersection. There's some multi multifamily housing and senior housing north of that intersection. And then there's quite a bit of existing, retail and commercial uses right now at that intersection. The next station would be the Maplewood Mall Transit Center station. Obviously, that would also serve that Maplewood North End district. There's an existing transit center there, connections to several other bus routes and a large park and ride facility. And this was one of the top preferred station areas in our public feedback. And then, as we've talked about, we still want to be able to serve St. John's Hospital. So it's a little more difficult now since we're coming from the east instead of going right by St. John's, coming from the west. But we still are working to find a station location to serve St. John's. And that would potentially be on either Hazelwood Street or on St. John's Boulevard. And the primary focus there is to serve the hospital. There's also other medical buildings, and there's multifamily housing nearby as well. So I think that is what I have for stations. I can turn it back to the chair for questions.
Thanks, Sarah. And I know you covered a lot of information, and I appreciate that staff recommendation. I also understand there were some workshops with Maplewood City Council and the St. Paul Planning Commission the Transportation Committee last month. So if there's anyone from those jurisdictions who want to make a comment or a reaction before we open it up.
Councilmember Villavicencio was unable to make the meeting at the last minutes, and I believe we have J-Lor filling in for Councilmember Yang. So, Mr. Chair, we don't have either one of the elected officials from those jurisdictions on this committee present for today's meeting. Well,
we'll have an opportunity for more comment and consideration. Any other questions from anybody on the committee of Sarah Pflaum or staff at this point? All right.
Chair, I don't know if you see my hand up.
Oh, of course, I'm completely blind here. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just had I just had a question about what we consider as walkable. I know we in the earlier slide we were looking at areas that are like about a 10-minute walk. I just had a question if that was something that's standard of like transportation projects, or if that's just a choice that we make together. And also if we would be able to consider like a 5-minute walk or yeah.
Yeah, we do, it's probably more standard for transit projects, and especially for making sure that that the stations are in walkable locations. But on these federally funded transit projects, we can also make some of the improvements for getting folks to the station. So that's one of the things that we try to look at right up front is where there may be some gaps and where we should look at potentially finding her and where we could potentially make some improvements to get people to the stations. But we do on that walkability map, we had a 10-minute walk shed, but also a 5-minute walk shed. And the stations are actually spaced close enough that all along those corridors, with the exception of just right at the Highway 36, all the way along those corridors, the stations are spaced to be like a 5-minute walking distance for anybody along the corridor.
I think the other thing I would note is we have on these projects now, with the more sophistication of the tools we have, we try to move away from half-mile, quarter-mile, which back in the day that was to generally equate to a 10-minute, 5-minute walk, but that was on the assumption that you had perfect pedestrian infrastructure and it was easy to do. We now have modeling software that was represented by that one image, at least for the 10-minute walk shed. But as Sarah mentioned, we also have it for the 5-minute. In addition, we have layers of that. So we actually look at low stress walk and high stress. And so it accounts for everything of having to cross busy intersections with or without pedestrian assistance, pedestrian push button. And so those are all things that we do look at as we look at ensuring the accessibility. And as Sarah mentioned, we're fortunate that FTA recognizes that of value. So they allow us to pay for pedestrian connections improvements as part of the transit projects, and actually without detriment to the cost effectiveness index. So they actually allow us to move that below the line when we make those kind of investments. So it doesn't count against us as all the other costs of the project do.
Yeah, that's really helpful, and that's also really great that that's now being considered. For the slide where the Iowa high rises and also the future development for housing there, would that be a consideration at all, or could that be?
Yeah, we will definitely look around the station area to make improvements, but we are also looking at sliding it potentially south of Larpenteur to be closer, to just make sure that we make that connection really easy.
Larpenteur has definitely been one that we've heard the most feedback from as recently as Monday evening from CBAC. We were actually made aware of the property that's to the east of White Bear Avenue, south of Iowa, that's used to have buildings on it. It's completely controlled by the St. Paul Housing Authority, and I think is slated for redevelopment. So understanding what that development might be in the future might help us answer some questions.
And moving forward, these station locations, I mean, these are the 12 that we plan to do more in-depth study on. So, and then, we'll still look at cost and ridership. Some of these locations may not pencil out, but we also will look at, I know on Monday when we met with our business and community advisory group, they felt like the station area that we show here is not long enough. They would like the station to be closer to that Iowa high rise, and we definitely will still look at where exactly that station should be sited, and we will look at all of the information about the neighborhoods and what's coming and what the needs are to actually site that station.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner, I just noticed Ianni has been able to join us, who's our co-chair for CBAC, and he may want to weigh in on this conversation since it was a good chunk of our CBAC meeting on Monday.
Yes, I just want to support what Commissioner Zhang mentioned about the high rise and the Hafner site. That was a topic, and we'll have quite a bit of the high rise existing, and then with the Hafner site, quite a bit more residential living spaces to support along the corridor, and so if we can get the beam closer or add a stop, whatever our options could be to support that extra need for ridership there was definitely one of the topics.
Well, thanks for that. Appreciate that conversation. Any other comments or thoughts based on this presentation? Well, thanks, Sarah. I know at this point we have an opportunity to hear from our project manager about an action being requested by staff. So Craig, are you going to walk us through that?
I will. Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. So this here is the action that I previewed early on in today's meeting. What we're seeking from you is concurrence with staff recommendation to advance these 12 proposed Purple Line BRT station locations for purposes of further technical evaluation and community engagement. And as has been noted a couple times here, these are roughly representing 2 block generalized areas. So we have not made any decision on exactly where a station would be within these areas. That would come with the technical analysis this fall and winter. And as has been mentioned too, we need these areas to be able to start the ridership forecasting process. And so the big piece here is the note that the number of stations and the station platform locations would not be considered finalized until the Corridor Management Committee, this body, makes a recommendation on a preferred roadway and transit design concept, which according to the schedule that we previewed earlier in the meeting is currently anticipated for March of 2024. So we'll bring more specifics and things like maybe the Larpenteur ends up being at Idaho or Iowa. We would find that out through the work we still need to do yet this fall and winter. But this is what we're asking for, is kind of your stamp of approval to give us the ability to move forward with these 12 locations.
Thanks, Craig. And by concurrence, I think we're really saying at this point, is there any heartache, any concerns, anything that we should be aware of, knowing that we're just advancing this plan for further review, both technically and getting a lot of input on the way. So this isn't anything cut in stone, but you know, it's really helpful to start with a plan and knowing that ultimately this will be evolving as we learn more. So I'll just open it up. If anybody has any concerns, speak now. Otherwise, I will assume that we're in concurrence, but I'll open it up and see if there's any comments. Well, with that, thanks, Craig. I think that it would really be interesting as we kind of meet more and get into the details, what we learn. But everybody's thoughts along the way, not just at these CMC meetings, would be really valuable. So don't hold back if you get anything that you'd like to discuss. And Mei-Chung, was that your hand from the last time, or maybe you have a comment?
Oh, it was from last time.
Oh, okay. Well, I always want to hear
Thank
from you. That's good. Okay, well, with that, we have the most promising design options from, we're going to hear from Deputy Project Manager Stephen Smith. This is kind of a preview, and we're going to have an opportunity to have the full presentation at the next meeting. But Stephen, are you ready to give us a little insight?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this is kind of, for the sake of time, I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. It's like the teaser at the end of the movie. So I'm going to go through. Stay tuned. I'm going to go through what we've been looking at related to the most promising design options and just kind of tease it up for what we're going to kind of what to come here in a month. So yeah, so we're right around the corner from having another CMC. So I just wanted to highlight in October, we're going to talk about those 3 to 4 most promising concepts, a lot of the work that's been going on behind the scenes to kind of get to this point of what we need in terms of evaluating the tier 1 screening, getting to that most promising 3 to 4, and then kind of going off into our tier 2 evaluation, which is that deeper analysis. I always like to say kind of taking those 3 to 4 options through the washer machine and getting that cost and ridership and a lot of other interesting things that people are definitely wanting to hear about. So I wanted to introduce the roadway segments. We have about 5 different roadway segments, the way that we broke it up from the engineering team. They're very different from each other to a certain extent. When you look at the Maryland segment, it's a little bit from the right-of-way standpoint, a little bit narrower. And then as you kind of move up north on White Bear up the corridor, it starts to widen it out. And so we have, well, the way we kind of thought about this is how do we break this up in logical segments and based on the characteristics of these segments. So we came up with 5 different ones. What you will hear about next month will be really focused on 1 through 4. 5, you kind of heard Sara mention that we're still working out, how do we serve St. John's and really trying to figure out whether or not what makes the most sense from a connection standpoint. But for the most part, we're going to really focus on segments 1 through 4, kind of showing you what is possible within concepts for kind of going from traveling from Maryland all the way up White Bear Avenue to Beam. So here's our roadway characteristics. This is kind of the first time you've seen this, but it's just really meant to be just what it says at a glance to really be able to highlight the differences of Maryland Avenue and White Bear. The posted speeds being a little bit different, the lengths of miles is a little bit different, but really what we see here is highlighting is that the businesses and the residential properties and the number of intersections and driveway accesses that we have to think about as we're considering what options really make sense for these different segments or different roadways. So another thing that we're going to be thinking about too as well is when we look at opportunity, you kind of heard this earlier from Craig and Sara, is Maryland has 100% sidewalks. But then White Bear, is there any opportunity to create better ped connections to the stations? Is there a way to bridge some of those gaps as part of our project? So you can see that it's not 100% on White Bear Avenue, but looking at those opportunities of where we could bridge those gaps to create better ped connections. And then I just want to go through also the guideway configurations. So we have what we call the universe of options, and we started to kind of narrow them down, but in cross-section form, this is what it looks like. The pink represents a transit only lane, and then the gray represents a general purpose lane for general traffic. And so as we're looking at this, we came up with about 7 different options related to what a configuration could look like. And then we take this into account on how does this look from each segment. So that's why I introduced the segments to you. And then lastly, we try to figure out, well, now that we looked at it from a segment level, what's the continuity of the entire stretch between Maryland and White Bear? What makes the most sense in terms of connections to each other? So we're going to end up going through that level of detail with you in the next month about what those 3 to 4 most promising concepts will look like, but it's going to be the entire stretch from Maryland all the way up to White Bear at Beam to show you what those full concepts can potentially look like and the ones that we want to take for further evaluation, doing that in-depth traffic, ridership costs, and all the other good stuff related to getting to a concept level, a plan view level of what it actually looks like so we can actually lay it out. And then lastly, just some of the key themes that's shaping our selection. We're taking into a lot of different things into account, working with the cities, working with St. Paul, working with Maplewood, working with Metro Transit internal staff, really trying to figure out what makes the most sense. So we've been doing a lot of work behind the scenes, but we're thinking about some of the key themes that are shaping our selection is the right-of-way impact, southern portion of the corridor, our pedestrian crossing volumes and safety concerns, our traffic volumes, operation and safety concerns, and then the efficient operation of Purple Line 2 as well. Provisions for local operations if needed. And then we have conducted a business inventory survey where we have already hit the ground and canvassed over 170 businesses. So a lot of the information that we will end up bringing to you has a lot of these different inputs into it to get down to that 3 to 4 most promising concepts. And Mr. Chair, with that, that's all I had as a teaser.
Well, thank you so much, Stephen. That's a full preview, and we have a lot to chew on, and we'll get ready to hear more. Any questions at this stage on kind of what we've heard so far? And actually, maybe I'll just open up. Does anybody have any comments or anything related to project related items that you've heard today that you'd like to share? Well, as you've heard, we're going to have another CMC meeting, pretty short order, October 11th. 1 p.m. I think that we have these monthly meetings scheduled, but these could be canceled if they're not needed. So I know that in looking at the schedule, we really will kind of want to do that one in October. Hear more. We've just heard, we got a preview. Tentatively, I think there's March and April would be a good time to ensure that we have some meetings, and then certainly during the spring and the summer, you can see kind of the cadence of meetings up ahead. As always, you don't have to wait for a meeting to reach out to project staff or any of us. If you have any thoughts, Craig, well done. And Chai, thanks for chairing the first part of the meeting. I appreciate everybody's involvement and engagement in these meetings. It really is helpful. We've come a long way and really getting into a lot of details that are really powerful to kind of look at. So I think it's safe to say the engagement has just begun. And with that, I want to again thank everyone and appreciate your attending today. And we'll see you very soon. We'll give you an extra 10 minutes to your day. And I want to really thank the staff for setting all this up. See you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So much.